Welcome, listeners, to episode 4 of season 4. And we have a very special guest again for you today. And this is Jigsaw, Josh Gillingham. So, Josh isn't necessarily the biggest horror movie fan, though he is a horror buff. But he is a specialist when it comes to Scandinavian history and mythology. He is an author, he is a game designer, he is a musician, and he is a teacher. So, a man of many talents. Welcome to the podcast.
Thanks so much for having me on.
Absolutely. So today we are discussing a film the director described as The Wizard of Oz for perverts. This is Midsommar by Ari Aster.
I told you that I want to go to that festival in Sweden.
No, you said it would be cool to go.
Yeah, and then I got the opportunity and I decided
Look, I
to
don't
do
mind
it.
you going. I just wish you would have told me. That's all.
What's happening? Danny. I invited Danny to come to Sweden. You know what she's been going through.
Christian says you've got this special week planned.
It's sort of a crazy festival. Special ceremonies and dressing up.
That sounds fun.
Tomorrow's a big day.
Is it scary?
We just need to acclimate.
I don't want to acclimate. I want to go.
Absolutely not.
That's what he described.
Not a bad description.
Yeah, I didn't hear that description.
And you picked it, so you'll have to explain yourself in a
I've
second
got a
here.
couple others, but I haven't heard that one.
Yeah, so this is Midsommar. This is an A24 film, and this is Ari Aster's second film. So this received a 7.1 on Internet Movie Database, 83% on Rotten Tomatoes, and had an audience score of 63%. So a little more popular with critics than with the audience.
And did I misread this? Is the director's cut had 100% score on?
Oh, that's interesting. I didn't actually
Oh, okay. I came
look up
across
the
that.
director's cut. That's
Yeah.
right. So for this episode, we did all watch the director's cut. So
Which I think, if my math is right, is 11 minutes longer.
yeah, so 11 minutes
okay.
longer, and apparently 100% critic score. On
That's
Rotten
what
Tomatoes.
I came across. Now, apologies if I'm mistaken, but that's what the number that I came across, and it surprised me because I didn't think that 11 minutes was that added that much. But anyway, we can get into.
Yeah, we'll get into
Apparently,
it. Sure.
apparently made a difference.
Yeah,
So
apparently,
yeah.
apparently.
All right, so this was starring Florence Pugh as Danny and Jack Rayner as Christian. And the synopsis of Midsommar goes as follows. A couple travels to Northern Europe to visit a rural hometown's fabled Swedish Midsummer Festival. What begins as an idyllic retreat quickly develops into an increasingly violent and bizarre competition at the hands of a pagan cult. So, Josh, what made you choose Midsommar?
Well, like you said, I'm not a big horror movie guy in general, but I was intrigued, and I knew, being friends with you, eventually I'd probably end up watching a horror movie. So
Fair
I
assumption.
think you gave me a list of sort of Scandinavian themed horror movies, and I heard good things about Midsummer. I was intrigued by sort of the pagan ritual connection, and I just even from the poster and the trailer, you see it's not your classic, crawling around in a decrepit haunted house at night
Yeah.
sort of thing. It's a much different aesthetic and vibe. So I was intrigued.
Because I think you're so interested in Vikings. You and I saw The Northman together.
Yes.
So I thought I was trying to find maybe a Viking horror film. So we at least got Scandinavian horror. And I was glad that when you and I watched this together, you did seem to recognize lots of things from the reading you've done in your background in Scandinavian history. So hopefully you can bring some of that
Yeah.
perspective.
Yeah, and as a disclaimer, I don't have any degrees in history or anything like that. But like you said, author, game designer, spent way too much time digging into translations of myths. And I also must be upfront about the fact my knowledge of Icelandic and Norwegian history is much better than my knowledge of Swedish history, which the story takes place in Sweden in the film. So I'll just add that before we get too far into things. So
Fair enough.
yeah.
So maybe off the top, what did you think? Or did you like it? Did you not like it? What was your impression of the film?
I genuinely enjoyed this movie. And I didn't. It was not the movie I expected it to be, and we're not going to give away any spoilers at this part of the episode. But I generally enjoyed it as a movie. It was cinematically beautiful. I loved the character. I loved the story. At the risk of maybe getting a little deep here right off the bat, I was just thinking about the film afterwards, and there's a sort of paradox about like the truth of art, right? Which could be summarized maybe a little bit like this. For example, like a painter paints this picture of a dandelion and puts it up in a gallery, leaves. Somebody else comes and looks at it and says, "That's a beautiful picture of the sun," and walks away. And the thing that the artist meant to portray and the experience that the viewer had were totally different things. So the question is like, what is the fundamental truth of art? Does the artist get to say what it's about, or
Mhm.
does the viewer? And there's a whole bunch of different kind of sort of opinions on that. Like, is it the artist? Is it the viewer? Is there no truth? Or like, what's happening there? But in this film, I really felt like Ari Aster was coming to this and was really trying to say something with it. I don't think it was sort of like a mindless spree of violence. I really think that, yeah, there was a lot of thought and depth to the characters. So I
There's a
really
lot of
enjoyed that.
themes
So,
in his films.
yeah.
All seem to have these themes, but this one maybe deviates a little bit from Hereditary and Beau is Afraid. Maybe just to jump to Leatherface here for a second.
Mhm.
Do you like Midsommar as a film?
I did. In general, I have some specific gripes about it, and I think part of the challenge for me watching it. So this is only my second time viewing. The first time was in the theater. So part of my challenge was having just come off watching Hereditary, which I think is a stronger film. I'll talk about that later. And this is our third A24 film in four
In four
episodes.
episodes, yeah.
So I couldn't help kind of start comparing it to other A24 films or the other Ari Aster film that I'm really familiar with because I haven't seen Beau is Afraid. So yeah, longer answer is I did enjoy it, but I have some very specific things that I had trouble with.
Cool. Yeah, I'll be curious to hear what those are. I think we'll have a fairly short discussion, spoiler free, because I think
So
we kind of
much.
have to
Yeah,
get to
so
spoilers
much
to really talk
dig
about this
into.
film.
Yeah,
Like,
yeah.
you know what you're talking about, like what was the message of the film? What was Ari Aster going for?
Yeah.
Kind of hard to discuss maybe without spoilers.
And I do think this is the type of film, without getting into details, that continue with that metaphor. Whatever Ari Aster was trying to say, I think to be a wide variety of interpretations based on people's viewing, just because it's so intense and draws in a lot of themes that we'll get into.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I think one unique thing about this as a horror film is we tend to think of most horror films happening, as you said, like a dark, scary, haunted mansion and jump scares. But this takes place in a very bright, idyllic setting. It is during the daytime almost entirely, except for one exception.
Yeah.
And Ari Aster described this as a folk horror breakup movie. So he kind of compared this to like a rom-com in some ways, or has some tropes from rom-coms. So it's a very atypical horror film. And that's why, I guess you don't have as much to compare it to, perhaps, because you've not watched a lot of horror.
Yeah.
I thought this was really interesting to watch closely in proximity to Hereditary.
Yes.
It almost kind of blends from the end of Hereditary
So,
into
yeah.
this movie, which I
So
think is
much
really cool.
connective tissue. Yeah, for sure.
But let's maybe let's talk about what did we like about the film on a surface level.
Yeah.
What elements, like, is there anything that stood out to you that you really liked about the film in general?
Yeah, coming into it with certain expectations about like what a horror film was going to be like, I was really blown away by the cinematography. I thought that some of the shots were beautiful, especially there's kind of the shot where they're coming into the village, and it's just he does this cool thing with the camera. And anyways, that caught me off guard. So that was nice, and the characters were really deep. I know that's sort of a trope in horror films, that you kind of get to really love the characters at the beginning, but he did it in a way where it wasn't cheesy. Like there was like this really broken relationship, and a lot of the characters were kind of at odds with each other, but it was this really beautiful and dynamic kind of connection between the different characters that plays out obviously in the rest of the film. But,
Totally.
yeah,
I'd say we all would cite cinematography as one of the biggest strengths of this film,
100%.
and the way he frames shots.
Yeah, framing and some of the drone shots were the ones that really got, like, they're just so beautiful. The overhead shots of the feast tables,
yes,
and the overhead shots of the forest and the trees. I mean, yeah, he's visually, Aster is stunning. Like, and I would say he's a visual director.
Yeah.
Like that's what stands out in Hereditary as well, is the visual element. I before I forget, because this is not spoiler, I wanted to ask you about, with your musical background, did you pay attention to some of the, like, underlying, I'm using drone again, but like the drone music that was underlying? I thought some of that stuff was kind of cool. what he was doing.
yeah, I want to get into that.
Okay. If you think it's connected to spoilers,
Josh
we can talk
sent me a
about it
list
later.
of themes, and one of them was Nordic folk music. So
Yeah,
okay,
so I want to talk a little bit
Okay,
about that.
let's
We
leave it
preface that, but we
there.
should definitely touch
Yeah.
on that. Yeah, for sure.
actually, you could talk about the music. Maybe I don't know if that'd be a spoiler, or if you think it delves into spoiler territory.
Yeah, so I mean, this is kind of a broader conversation. We talk about like the Norse myths, and particularly like paganism connected to Norse ideology, if you want to call it that. The reality is, it's a very jaded subject for historical reasons and has been sort of misappropriated in many different ways. So it's always an interesting thing to kind of dance around, and that it has a lot of power. I think it intrigues a lot of people. I'm definitely very interested in like in the history of the Vikings and stuff like that. And I think it's important work to sort of reclaim that space. But you also have to kind of be aware of some of the historical pieces. So one of the things that is really problematic is that we really don't have a lot of historical evidence of what the Vikings did, especially in terms of cultural or religious ceremonies. And there's this real need, we'll maybe talk about it a little bit later why, but there's a real need in some groups to sort of reconstruct this kind of authentic experience of this culture that we really don't have a lot of access to. We're talking like tenths of a percent of, you know, what they would have done do we have access to, partly because Vikings didn't have a written language. People will point to the runes. The runes wasn't a language per se in the sense of, you know, like writing books and creating historical documents. They feature a rune stone at one point, which is a kind of a tropey Viking thing to have in there, which is basically like a stone that has this sort of script around the edge. And typically those stones would say things like, you know, like Thorgeir was buried here, or like Olav went raiding.
Is that like we see at the top of the cliff when they're putting their hands on that stone with runes on it?
No, that's a little bit. They're kind of playing off that theme, but there is one of the stones, kind of like when they first walk in the community. There's like a classic kind of typical rune stone, and the shape of the runes is actually has to do with the fact that they were carved into stone, right? So you have these very like angular, sharp lines, and that's the reason it was there. But the other thing that you always have to consider too, with sort of what was really accurate and what was historical, was that the only people who were writing things down about the Vikings were kind of the Christian missionaries and Christian crusaders who were kind of fighting them. And so not only do we not have very much in terms of you know, sources that we can draw from. There are things like the sagas from oral traditions, but a lot of what we do know about Vikings and how we think about them and how they're portrayed in media and even in history is told from essentially their enemies, right? Both religiously, politically speaking.
Those aren't biased at all.
Yeah, not biased at all. So it's a really you really have to dance around this question of like, well, were the folk instruments that they were using and some of the styles, were they traditional? Were they not? You know, were they authentic? Were they not? It's sort of hard to say.
So he knows a lot about Vikings.
Well, I'm a little bit nerdy about that. So anyways, I don't know if that answers your question. That's kind of a non-answer to your question, but that's going to come up, I think, a lot in this episode is like, was it authentic? Was it real? Did it really? And anyways, yeah.
Can I just, that raises a question for me. For you, does that matter?
So I'm talking about the sunflower and the sun interpretation, truth of art sort of thing, right? So for me, as somebody who's like really passionate about, you know, Viking history and the Norse myths and Scandinavian culture, coming to this film, like I really would like to see the symbology and the traditions and the dress and the architecture to be like truly reflective. There were some really delightful like tie-ins and twists, but overall I didn't get a sense that that was really the intent of the film to be authentic. And if anything, I did a little bit of reading afterwards, just some interviews with the director, and at one point it seemed to give a sense that he was almost playing with this idea of like tropes that people stereotypically have about, you know, Scandinavian communities or cults or the occult sort of thing, and he's kind of playing with that more, which I can appreciate that. But from a viewing standpoint, I was craving a little bit more, I think, of the.
Now, could that be explained away though, because this is a cult and they perhaps have created their own traditions and their own? Would that be an explanation, perhaps, why it's not maybe historically accurate, that this cult has maybe taken elements of Scandinavian mythology or history, but then twisted it to their own likings? Or
the snake kind of bites its own tail on that one, right? But it's yeah, possibly, right? So the other thing that a lot of people might not realize is that like Scandinavia is like a deeply Christian country, area of the world, like set of countries from about like, you know, anywhere from, you could argue, probably like 1,000 AD all the way till today. So a lot of the Viking and pagan traditions that are recorded even in the time were sort of fading as Christianity took over. So the dress of the people and the architecture is extremely sort of middle to late Middle Ages sort of like very Christian Scandinavia, but the community is so enveloped in the runes and this you know, seemingly occult sort of worship of the earth. It's kind of quasi pagan type culture. So it's an interesting juxtaposition, right, of these sort of like traditionally European, very Christian outfits and sort of lifestyle, and and then sort of the involvement of these.
Do you think it's quite purposeful
pagan
that the
symbols.
boyfriend's name was Christian?
Oh,
perhaps?
100%, 100%. Gotta be. Yeah, that
So,
was a little on the nose.
I mean,
but-
the reason I asked the question was because, and for our scores of Nordic listeners,
Yes.
this is not meant to be offensive, but like
We're huge in Sweden.
for
Yeah.
for me, who doesn't have the extensive knowledge that you do, it didn't detract and it didn't matter because it was just a setting. It
Right,
was
right.
a placeholder for the stories and the characters.
Totally. Yeah.
Whereas something like Eggers' The Northman,
Totally.
that was important to get it right
Right.
historically,
Totally.
at least from my perspective.
Totally.
But in this one, I get it. Ideally, you would like to see them do it well. But for the average viewer, I don't know how much that mattered because that was the trappings of the story as opposed to really the story itself. There was
Right.
a lot of other stuff going on, right?
Totally. Yeah.
Going back to music though, like music is very important to this film, I think.
Yeah.
Because it's daytime and it's beautiful and it's an idyllic setting.
Yeah.
The music is really important for putting that like horror mode on it and making it feel
Totally.
like a horror
Definitely.
film.
Yeah.
Definitely.
Because the music was kind of pleasant and beautiful sometimes, but always kind of a bit discordant. Did you think?
Yeah, that's why I asked the question about the underlying drone because the same thing happens in Hereditary.
Yes.
Where he's got this dissonance and this almost so low in the range to be imperceptible. It's almost felt as opposed to heard.
Which Hereditary totally has.
Totally,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah,
So
yeah.
that's, to me, I noticed that right away with this, that there's, I mean, it's so interesting, so cool to see two Aster films back to back almost, like within weeks of each other, because you start to see what he's doing as a director.
Right,
and,
right.
and visually and orally, he's doing many of the same things in this one that he's doing in Hereditary, I think.
And he, oh, sorry, go ahead.
Oh, I was gonna say one of the folk instruments I was looking out for, and I didn't see in the film. Maybe I missed it, but there's an instrument called Hardanger fiddle, which is kind of like a violin, but it's got a bunch of extra drone strings, and it has a very sort of awkwardly rhythmic, kind of discordant way of being played in like traditionally, which I thought the music sort of reflected that a little bit. I showed a video of a famous Hardanger fiddle player to my wife, and she sort of was like twitching. She's like, that's music? They consider that to be music? But yeah, so I think there was echoes of that there a little bit, though how tightly
So you're saying you
connected.
think that's what was being played?
No, I was looking for a Hardanger fiddle in the film. I didn't see it, but the style of music they're playing, sort of the droning,
Right.
kind of like lilting, awkward, not even awkward, but sort of like not typically what we think of like Western music type things, was partly probably just for the exoticism of like pagan music, but may have drawn some influence from that sort of folk tradition. So
Super cool.
Can I just we might hit on this, but is anybody going to talk about the opening tableau?
That's pretty huge. That would also be probably in the spoilers.
Is it spoiler? Okay,
section.
because I was just going to say when we were talking about cinematography and the adult fairy tale aspect of the film,
Yeah.
I just love the opening tableau and how it opens like a curtain and then it goes to the winter
Totally.
treetops.
Yeah.
And it was such a fairy tale feel. Like it was, you could have said once upon a time, and that's totally what's evoked at the beginning of the film.
yeah.
And I just love it. I mean, visually, he's so stunning. I'm really taken with what he does visually.
100%. I agree.
Yeah.
And I think because he said he was directly influenced by Wicker Man, which makes sense because this is very evocative of Wicker Man, which is another folk horror. And music, very important in the Wicker Man as well. Just, I think we associate song and music with cults, I guess.
The bear doesn't punch anybody in this one, though.
No punching bear. That's
There you
true.
go, there you go.
If only. That's true. Yeah. Is that one of your big criticisms of the film? I guess we'll get into.
Yeah, right.
That the bear doesn't punch
Bear
anybody.
doesn't punch
yeah.
anyone?
Yeah. That's a huge
Cool.
criticism.
Florence Pugh, I think fair to say, like amazing performance.
Oh, incredible performance! Yeah,
Yeah.
She was probably my top pick if I had to
I
from the
would
film
agree.
to
Yeah,
the strongest.
100%.
Yeah,
I mean,
yeah.
and so again, even right down to the anguish and the grief.
Yeah.
The scene where she's just emoting to the nth degree, and it's a soul crushing grief, and it's the same as Toni Collette's
Mirror to
performance.
Toni
Yeah,
Collette, yeah.
totally.
Yeah.
And there's, I mean, I'm sure we'll get into this, but it's definitely something, and you would know this probably better than, well, have you seen Beau is Afraid?
No, I've
Okay.
not seen it yet.
So you'd probably know it the best of the three of us, but it seems to me that Aster definitely has some underlying grief issues.
100%.
Trying to express through
that he's
it,
trying
yeah.
to express
Yeah,
through his
yeah.
films. And he's been asked about it and has been coy about the
Yeah, he
the
hasn't
response.
explicitly
Yeah.
said anything, but he's kind of hinted that, yeah, maybe some of that is. Yeah.
Because it's just it's so in your face in all of his films. I mean, the way this film opens and then carries on through is just heartbreaking.
And apologies to Josh because you've not seen Hereditary.
All good, all good.
But
Yeah,
again, another thing I love that Ari Aster does is the way he does transitions.
Yeah.
There's that scene where Danny's in the guy's apartment.
So good.
And then, is it Pele says something to her that triggers her and she goes into the bathroom and then she's in the airplane?
Oh,
yeah,
that was super cool.
So great. So great.
So yeah, he's a pretty brilliant director. Just
yeah,
all those little things.
I didn't see any interviews with anybody. Well, that's not true. I saw interviews, but not talking about Aster specifically. But I know Toni Collette, that one of the interviews I saw with Hereditary, she was praising him for the idea that, and I think this speaks to the idea of him being a visual director, because she said he knew exactly to a T what he wanted in each scene. He had storyboarded and thought out exactly what it was going to look like. And I think that comes through when you have a director that's so visual. They have to pre-visualize what they're going to do. It's not luck. I mean, it's skillful, but it's also just that idea of he sees it and then he can manipulate the tools at his disposal to create what he's seeing. It's absolutely phenomenal.
Totally.
Yeah.
So I guess I'm curious to hear from you because we had your diaper ready because you were worried that this was going to be like a terrifying
you said you provided
film.
one.
Yeah.
You didn't have one, and I was
I
worried. I was like, how's this going to go?
But I checked where you were sitting afterwards. It was dry. I was impressed.
perfect.
So what did you think of this? If you were expecting a horror movie, what was your experience with the horror of this film? And were you scared? Were you unnerved? Did it not have that kind of effect? I'm curious to hear how you reacted to the film as a horror film.
I like it was scary in the sense of like it had tension. There was obviously some pretty like in your face gore kind of partway through it. I think if anything that really sort of fulfilled my expectation in terms of like what I'd expect, something based off a Scandinavian or Norse sort of folklore type thing. Because Scandinavian folklore is very, very dark, and even like children's tales and stuff like that. It can be pretty gory, as well as like the Norse myths are just rife with like the most scenic type gore you could think of. So the fact they worked some of that in there, that seemed to fit really well. I wouldn't say, I didn't have any trouble sleeping that night. I was like, other than just thinking of all the things I wanted to see on the podcast, but yeah, but no, it was good. I know I questioned, and I chatted about this a little bit right after the film, that we were trying to hold on to it for this, but after watching it, I can see why it's classified as a horror film, but it didn't feel like it fit sort of my idea of like a stereotypical tropey horror film, which is great. I don't think I probably would have enjoyed a tropey horror film as much. This really felt, like I said at the beginning, like he was trying to express something artistically through it, which is great. There's obviously the tension and the horror pieces of it, but yeah,
because I think folk horror as a subgenre looks very different than other horror films. Like The Wicker Man, same. I think complaint, like it's throughout the film, there's not much horror, but then when you realize what's going on and when you like kind of the climax, I think has enough horror that it would be characterized as horror.
Right.
But this would be a fairly accessible film for people who do not like horror because it's tame relative to something like Hereditary, I think.
Yes, but there are a couple of scenes that I think would throw people. I can remember, like, even as a seasoned viewer, there was one scene in particular where I was like, especially seeing it at the theater and not knowing what to expect, it was like, holy Jesus, like, I couldn't believe what, like, I knew what was coming. I had a sense of what was going to happen, but I didn't have a sense of how he was going to visualize that. I think we've talked a couple times about The Wicker Man, but I think it's important to mention, I believe that this is a direct, there's a direct line from this to The Wicker Man in terms of folk horror history.
Yeah, and he said that.
Yeah, because you've got a remote community, you've got all these pagan rituals, but I mean the underlying story is very different, but in terms of the overall trappings, I think are very, very similar.
100%. Even the climax, there's some similarities. Yeah. And I lost my train of thought. Never mind. I think we're all holding back a little bit because it's
Totally.
really difficult to talk about this film without going
into spoilers. Yeah.
So we this is another one we can talk. Sorry, this is going to be this is another one we can talk about jump scare Jen, because there's full frontal in this one as well. So
There is indeed.
Yeah.
Oh, I wanted to ask you.
Okay.
So you said when we reviewed Megan last episode that you had a hard time thinking of that film as horror. This is obviously an atypical horror film, but do you have any problem categorizing this as a horror film?
No.
No. Yeah, I would have no problem. I think its primary mode is horror.
I think partly for the horrific nature of some of the physical horror in the film, but also, I mean, the ending couldn't get much more horrific.
Yeah.
I don't think.
And it follows a formula of you've got, a cast of characters at the beginning and a much smaller cast of characters at the end.
Yeah.
And I think that's I don't think that's a huge spoiler considering it's a horror film, but that's, I think, a trapping of horror for sure.
Yeah, absolutely. And I don't have a problem. I think, as we pointed out in Megan, like, my issue with that more was I felt like its rating was holding it down.
Yeah.
Whereas in this case, I don't think that was the case at all.
But to Josh's point, like, when people who are not horror fans think of horror, they'll probably think of like Freddy and Jason and slashers and blood and guts, and this is very different than that. So, yeah. Okay, so maybe why don't we give our just final thoughts on the film in terms of whether we'd recommend it or not, and then we'll jump into full spoilers. So, Josh, would you recommend people watch this film? And if who should watch this film?
From a film perspective, I'd say if you're okay with gore, then I really enjoyed it as a film. I would recommend it as a film. I don't think I would recommend it to my friends in the sort of Viking history or Norse history community as a film. Like, go watch this because it's so accurate, or it's so deep in terms of the signs of the way they're using some of the symbols. But I would say it's an enjoyable film with a theme that's obviously and a culture that's.
But you said you would not recommend this to your wife, right? So for people who are wary of horror, you would not recommend it. Sounds like.
I think if you're like wanting to dip your toes into horror, this is a good place to start. As I was, I can speak from personal experience. I think if you are a seasoned horror fan, obviously you're going to enjoy it. But I also don't think if you watch this movie, it's maybe. Would you say it's a fair thing to say that is it a good entrance into horror film?
I do.
I can't really say because I don't have context for other horror films.
From the perspective of people who are easily scared or wary of the experience and having nightmares, and I do think it's an accessible one.
Yeah.
There again, I think with the qualifier that you have to be comfortable with some level of gore.
Yeah.
But I don't think this will keep you up at night like some other more traditional.
No, and there's no jump scares per se or anything like that.
No.
There's
it's bright and sunny and
If anything, like a lot of the horrific stuff is almost like understated. Like it almost comes on a screen and then you are like, whoa, it's like right there. It wasn't sort of like thrown in your face. You have to kind of notice it, right? So,
and he's such a masterful filmmaker. If you appreciate good filmmaking, I think it's also
definitely
strong recommend.
Yeah.
Leatherface, or you had some detractions? Is that something you have to talk about in terms of spoilers?
Yeah, definitely in terms of spoilers. Do I think it's a worthy film to see? Absolutely. I will say though, if you haven't seen any of Astor's work, I can't speak to Beau is Afraid, but I would view this first because I think it's a weaker film than Hereditary, and I would see Hereditary after. Otherwise, I think you'll be disappointed.
I think too, this is more accessible in terms of you can just watch it at face value and understand what's happening
until the end.
Yeah, but I think Hereditary might be more confusing, or might
I think you're right.
Slightly less accessible.
Yeah, I think so.
Require more commitment on the viewers.
That's interesting because I'm sort of like you. So you like Hereditary better?
Absolutely.
I also like Hereditary better, but I think this might be a better film. I think there might be more richness and more going on thematically, perhaps.
Maybe, but I think what I have to say about what I feel is a weakness, I think detracts from that.
But for his second film, considering the high bar he's set with Hereditary, I was still very satisfied with this. Like, I think we're maybe like nitpicking a bit. Like Hereditary, I think is better, but I think this is still a fantastic film. High recommend.
Absolutely.
From me, for sure.
Yeah. Cool.
All right, spoiler time.
No, we didn't actually talk about very much, but I'm fine to go into spoiler.
Yeah.
I think we tried, but I mean, if I'm honest, there's so much about this film we have to spoil. So unfortunately, if you've not seen Midsommar, I think you should go watch it.
Yeah.
And if you have seen it, then stick around for some spoilers.
You betcha.
All right, ready? We do.
Going to spoilers. Okay.
So I just had an upcoming thing spoiled for me.
So do you want to start with what you didn't like about it?
Yeah, my biggest beef is the pacing. I feel I keep coming back to the idea of him. He's and this is not me. He is an incredible visual storyteller and visual director. I feel the story is the weakest link in that. Like the beginning part didn't have to be that long.
Oh, interesting.
I thought it went on way too long.
Now, to be fair, as this is the
Which I don't
director's
need to be.
as this is the director's cut, and there's 11 more minutes, I do feel like he had a lot more just dialogue for the beginning, and some of the ritual stuff was longer. Like, I wonder if that's a product of you watching the director's cut. I wonder if you would still have that same criticism of the base film.
No, I did, because I felt it was too long in the theaters when I saw it. I mean, but to be fair, I feel like many horror films are too long. They like 2 hours and 39 minutes is too long for this kind of film,
Right.
in my opinion. He's a brilliant visual storyteller, and I mean, I love what he does, but there were just things that I didn't think need, like, yeah, there's just things I didn't
Do you want to expand a little bit? Like, so you're talking from the first act, or things where you would like to cut?
I think he could have condensed the first act. I think it could have been shorter. We get it. Christian's a dick. Florence Pugh has like this terrible family, tragedy. He wants to get out of the relationship, but he's too chicken shit to do it. And then for some inexplicable reason invites her along on this trip with his buddies. I just felt like the whole beginning bit was, you didn't need to reestablish the fact that he was a knob.
Yeah.
And that, and also, to be fair, she was very codependent with him.
Yeah.
Right. Until, but that her story to me is the saving grace of the film. Like, that's the beauty of the film.
So you're talking about like him at the diner chatting with his buddies.
Yeah,
like, maybe
100%.
that was too much.
There's like all those longing glances with the long red-haired girl and all the rest. Like, okay, we get it. Like, you didn't need to go on and on about, like, I thought he was hitting us over the head with that.
Can I just speak to one thing on my notes? And this
Yeah.
is not a dig at you necessarily, but
But
I thought it was kind of funny. Mark's character, like the goofy
Oh,
guy,
yeah.
I wrote down Mark's lack of patience is maybe poking fun at casual moviegoers, because there'll be like a long-winded kind of like ceremony, and he like starts getting bored and like commenting, and he's like, when is this going to be over? He starts dinking around with his glass and like,
Totally.
and I think that's sort of how I felt. It's like, this is a long scene, but I wonder if Mark is supposed to kind of embody like people in the theater who are like, all right, let's get on with it. And I'm not saying that you are not sophisticated, but do you think that was intentional? Like, these very long ceremonial happenings, and then Mark's sitting there like,
he sleeps through the he sleeps
Yeah,
through the first,
yeah,
right?
does,
So
yeah.
right,
Well,
yeah.
it's funny how like I interpreted, because I have notes to myself actually as well, that I questioned whether Mark was supposed to be a satire of American tourism.
yeah.
Right? And just the idea that he has no patience for anything beneath the surface.
Yeah.
Like, other than getting laid.
Yeah.
And falling
And
asleep.
peeing on trees.
Yeah.
and doing psychedelic mushrooms.
Yeah,
and,
like-
so yeah.
But even then, like, the mushrooms don't mellow him out. He's like,
He's freaking out.
yeah, he's freaking out, and he's complaining about the bugs, and I found him, I mean, I don't think anybody that I know is going to hear this in terms of the person I'm going to talk about, and she's dead. But my ex-mother-in-law, she was British and went to Italy on a trip with her sisters. And then when she came back, complained about the lack of English in Italy, like that. So it struck me that Mark maybe is like his character is satirical of those kind, not just Americans, but those kinds of tourists that will go on those kinds of excursions and then complain about it being authentic,
100%. Yeah, I
because,
agree with that.
because they're not getting what they think they should get out of it or whatever. Could it be about moviegoers as well? Sure. And I mean, I have a limit to I feel a bit necessary to defend myself here. I do have a limit in terms of I've seen a lot of longish movies.
And some filmmakers are self-indulgent, and I think
Yeah.
they know they are.
I mean, I think Scorsese's like that. Like, I haven't even started
Lynch.
The Irishman for that reason. I'm
Me neither.
looking at 3+ hours, and I'm like, okay, you're a great filmmaker, but I do think that that's just self-indulgence at that point. Like, are you thinking about your audience sitting through this? I don't know. I just don't feel. I feel you can tell the story in 2 hours or less, and if you need more, make a sequel. Like
Josh, what say you on the
Well,
length of the film?
this is the thing. I watch a lot of Scandinavian film, and so like Scandinavian made films with a Scandinavian film board, that sort of thing. And I do feel like it jives with sort of the pacing, I think, of like Scandinavian film in general. So that might be something he's kind of referencing to in terms of the pace. I haven't seen his other films, so I don't know if he sort of follows that. But I do find a lot of Scandinavian films, even ones that are a little bit more upbeat, are often like the longing glances and the scenes seeming too long, and some of the pan shots just kind of feeling like they're going on forever. So that might be a bit of a cinematic thing with Scandinavian film.
Is that a
too, so.
characteristic of folk horror as well? Because I think, like Wicker Man, you have to establish all these rituals and these songs and the culture, and sometimes that's just not that thrilling. Whereas, like, if you just got a killer in a house with some teenagers running around stabbing them, like, you can get through the plot faster. But part of folk horror, I feel like, is kind of immersing yourself, kind of like the characters are, kind of just learning about this culture that they're immersed in.
I think that's a fair point. But you're talking, like, I would say
You were saying the first act, though.
90 minutes versus 120 minutes,
Yeah.
Versus 150 minutes
Yeah.
versus 180 minutes, or you know what I mean? Like,
right,
I think there's a limit at which you can start to look at, particularly the codependent relationship with Christian and Danny. I think there's lots of short. People get it. Like you see one scene, you go, okay, I know what's going on. Like, you don't really need to. I think you're right though. When they get to Sweden, it's Sweden, right?
Yeah.
They're in. When they get there, yes, I think you need to take your time and establish some things. And but I think I just felt like it went on a bit long for me.
That's fair. That's fair.
I wonder if that's why folk horror is a bit of an acquired taste, because it does require a little of extra patience. And that's where I thought maybe Mark's character was sort of meant to.
Yeah, that's cool. I hadn't thought about that, but
people in the theater going like, "Oh God,
that's so annoying."
Another
so annoying.
I love that actor. He's
he actually was really funny.
He was hilarious.
So you had mentioned earlier runes, and I think we also talked about like framing and cinematography. Like I love those shots where he's over the table, and the tables are always shaped in the different rooms. That maybe relate to, you're gonna know them better than me, but I think one was about like family, and another one was about like rebirth. And so, do you want to talk a bit about the runes?
Sure. And I'm always like preface this with I am historically interested in the runes. I don't find any personal sort of significance, or sort of I don't attach any sort of like magical properties.
I think you'd be wearing
to
some
runes.
runes on your
But yeah, except for these that I carry in my pocket. No, but I respect and appreciate that for some people. It's a very important part of their religious experience and their kind of own self-claimed kind of cultural background. So not to say anything of that, I use runes in my own games and books very specifically and very carefully. I think it's something that is historical to Vikings and should be used. I think it's something that shouldn't be thrown around too lightly. If you're, it's something that you wouldn't really like any sort of religious symbol. You wouldn't want to kind of throw that around too lightly. So I appreciate in the films. I do think he's trying to use them in a way that's expressing something.
Did you recognize them and know what they meant as you were watching?
Okay, so let's take a few steps back, and then we'll talk about meaning of runes. So where the runes come from, historically, they're obviously the writing system that the Vikings had, but mythologically, from the sources that we have and that we have to work with, the origin of the runes is told from the perspective of the god Odin, who is sort of the king of the gods, if you like, in the Norse myth, sort of the Zeus figure, if you like, though he's much different in many different ways. But at one point in time, he's got this ravenous quest for knowledge, and so at one point in time, he climbs up to the highest bough on the world tree, Yggdrasil, and he wants to know the meaning of the runes, these sort of mystical symbols that have magical powers. And so he pulls a noose around his neck, and he throws himself off the tree, and he hangs himself, and he hangs there for 9 days and 9 nights.
Oh,
and
9 is an important number in this.
9 is the Odinic number, so we're gonna get back to 9 as well. So 9 is really, anytime you see 9 in any sort of like Norse mythology, it's always like Odin. Okay, and I thought we were being beaten over the head with a lot of Odinic symbols in this thing. So they're just everywhere. We'll talk about more, but that's the origin of the runes. So as he kind of hangs on the tree as he's dead, the knowledge of the runes comes to him. He describes in some of the poems and sagas what the runes mean, and magic in general is seen as a very feminine force in sort of the Norse cosmology. And so Odin is this really interesting figure. He's only one of 2 Norse mythological male characters who get away with doing feminine things. It's very much seen as a strongly polarized like masculine versus feminine thing, and magic in general is a very, very feminine domain. So even like in Viking culture, sort of the seeresses, the ones who perform magic, typically would be women, typically older women. And so I really appreciate there was a little nod to that when they first meet the community leader in Harga, who's Ulf. He's kind of fumbling in his English, and he mentions something about the, what does he call it? The, not androgynous, it's a different word.
Hermaphrodite.
Hermaphroditic nature of and which is a total call out to Odin. So the fact that Odin wants to know magic, the fact that he uses magic is a very feminine thing. But that's sort of the initial sort of source that we have from the myths of like where the runes came from. So coming back to like what do the runes mean? So this runs the gambit. I have a lot of friends who, I don't myself, but I have a lot of friends who practice, reading runes and using runes in ways that are kind of working their own spiritual practice. In all my games, I always sort of check in with a few different ones of them, just ask them like, hey, I'm thinking about using this rune in this game. This is how I want to use it. Is that an okay interpretation? I'll be honest. Every time I ask that question, if I ask 12 people, I get 12 different answers. And I don't mean to make light of it, but it does sometimes feel a little bit like, almost like tarot or any sort of astrology thing where it's like the symbol has history and the symbol might have a meaning, but that meaning doesn't mean much without some sort of context. So, so as much as it's like, okay, this rune means this, it doesn't always mean that to all people, and different people would interpret it differently in different circumstances. So all that being said, the first rune that comes up as Reidho, the R, and so the feast table is sort of set up for that, and it translates to ride or journey. And so it's interesting that that's the first one because they've sort of, that's their welcome to the community, and they're sort of.
She has that on her shirt, I think, at the end too.
Yeah,
she's on a journey, emotional journey.
Throughout there's just runes everywhere. Like the people are carving them into like little sticks. Like all the dresses have them like stitched in. Like the guys have all the So and there's so many different runes too that it's hard to say like, oh well, he means this by this rune in that one. But I'll mention one other one. Or maybe two. So the second time they have a feast, it's arranged in a different. It almost looks like an O, like a diagonal, it's a diamond shaped O with the two tails. So that's a thala, and that one is very strongly linked to sort of the Nazi reclamation of the runes, and that's referenced earlier in the film too, when they're driving and the character Josh has the book, and Pele saying, oh, he likes to poke fun at me because the Nazis were obsessed with these runes, which they were, and we can get into,
we know that
we can get into the weirdness of like Nazi occultism if you want a little bit, but that one for sure is a strong nod. There was less gesturing towards sort of Nazi misinterpretation of the different symbols than I expected. I expected there to be a lot more, especially when he had the book. I was like, okay, here you go. This is gonna be a big kind of critique of modern interpretations of paganism and sort of neo-Nazism and stuff. But I didn't really feel like he went there. He sort of kind of,
it's surface level, I think. He's doing so much already.
He kind of gave a nod to it. He kind of gave a nod to it, but it wasn't a big emphasis. So, that being said, runes and then are also featured kind of throughout the rest of the film. But those are the first two that we see the picnic tables lined up in. So
this might be a good segue into a question that I have. Did you watch Stuckman's review of this?
No, I did not.
Okay, so I'm gonna ask you. It's not necessarily related to runes, but Stuckman said, I'm paraphrasing, he was disappointed compared to Hereditary, but he also felt that this was a very pretentious film. And so I'm wondering, with the reason I say I think it's a good segue is because I wonder with all of those things that the average viewer is not going to get at all, does that create a scenario where the director's being self-indulgent and pretentious too?
I think it would be pretentious if he was making a lot of like really deep cuts in terms of like mythology and folklore and stuff, but I really feel like there's a few nods to things here and there, but I think he's really just using it as decoration. And to somebody who doesn't have a background, they might look at it and say, oh wow, like this all must have so much meaning and he must have placed this certain rune here. There might have been in certain circumstances. I think there was a few situations where he was trying to do something, but in general I think it was mostly decoration. It's mostly aesthetic.
I mean, because it's actually, I mean, it's beautiful.
Oh, totally.
Right.
Totally.
And when he does the overheads,
yeah.
So it serves the film visually, whether or not you get what the rune means.
Totally.
Yeah, I think I disagree with that. I don't know if I would say it's pretentious. I find his films very rich because that you can go back and see all these little things he's put in there, and you don't just watch it at face value. Like watching it, I think this is the fourth time. Like in the apartment, like all the paintings on the walls in both the house and the tapestry at the beginning, and they pan through that one painting as well, showing like the love bewitching thing. Because there was it's interesting when you said that, like, this was the Wizard of Oz for perverts, and then above the fridge there's that picture of the scarecrow from Wizard of Oz.
I don't know if I picked
I
that
don't
up.
know.
Yeah, exactly. So,
Yeah.
but when you go back and watch, I'm like, oh, there's the scarecrow, and then of course at the end they stuff those people like scarecrows and burn them.
Right.
And the painting you referred to, was it the John Bauer, the Princess and the Bear?
Yeah, so John Bauer was a Scandinavian artist who was kind of it was kind of during the Scandinavian sort of Renaissance, if you want. At one point in time, Scandinavian cultures were really trying to revive sort of folklore. There was some national, political, cultural things going on. But yeah, so he did a famous series of paintings depicting different Scandinavian myths. And so there's Danny's like laying on the bed, right? She's kind of just woken up. I think it's after the party or something. And there's the picture of the princess and the bear behind her, which later on you realize there's some significance to that. But
you wouldn't pick that up the first time through.
The first time you watch it.
But when you go back and watch it, that's why I like his films, and I don't think I find it pretentious. Do you find it pretentious? Do you agree?
I'm not. It made me question. I don't know if I agree. It kind of tweaks something for me. Like, there was a scene that jumped out for me this time when I watched it, which I thought was a brilliant scene. It was after the party when they first come in the door. He's sat down and we're seeing him in the mirror.
That was really cool.
And her is, facing the camera. I just thought, oh, what a brilliant way to demonstrate the estrangement of the two characters, and how he's not authentic. He's not real. We're seeing a mirror image of a man, but we're seeing an authentic woman. I just thought that was brilliant.
Does he not do that a few times in the film, where there's like characters talking to each other like through reflections of other things?
He
I
must.
think there was
That
one or
one's
two
the
other
one that really jumped out at me.
But then, like, he forgets her birthday and he's making her cake and he's trying to light the candle. He can't, so it's kind of like, the flame of their relationship is dying.
Oh, that was great. That was
there's a lot of those things. I guess I'm kind of curious then, because you were saying, oh, he's like, we get it, he's a dick. By the end of the film, do you sympathize with Danny and the cult, or do you see them as like evil?
No, I'm totally on her side.
And I feel like, and this is maybe jumping like too far into things, but I feel like all the different characters, like Josh, Pele, Christian, obviously, like every one of them has sort of committed some sort of harm. Has done some sort of harm to her, and so it's and every one of their deaths. We can get into like the ways they die, because that's very like historically connected to like ritual paganistic deaths. But the ways they die, they're not dying kind of for no reason per se. At least the core group, there's always sort of like a transgression that they sort of have within the community that sort of leads to that, right? So I definitely feel for Danny at the end. It's shocking to see her smile, but it's such a great way to end the film. That's
I mean, Christian's a mediocre boyfriend, but do you think he deserves to be burned alive for that?
The short answer is no. I'm not suggesting that his lameness as a boyfriend deserves his fate,
because he's actually not a complete ass at all. Oh, sorry, I'll let you finish here.
No, but what I do think though is that his fate is necessary for the transcendence of Danny.
Yeah.
So she chooses to sacrifice him over one of the cult members, one of the Harga. That in itself is symbolic, but his fate has to happen in order for her to detach from that codependent, because her journey. So if you look at how the film goes in thirds, right? Like the first third is up to the plane, and then the landing in Sweden, and then you get to, I think it's the cliff scene is kind of like the next third, and then the final third. Her journey is from that codependence to complete independence, right?
Yeah.
And to me, it's necessary for him, not in a physical way to experience that, although he does, but his death is necessary for her to go beyond. And I thought that was, I don't know if I think he deserved it, but I was pleased by the outcome. Let's just put it that way.
Because sometimes characters like really awful and evil, and you want to see them get hurt.
No, I don't think he was that way.
He's kind of a lame ass.
Yeah.
But there are even times where he stands up for her, like when the friends all want to do the mushrooms, and he's like, no, I'm going to do them with her.
Yeah, yeah.
He's like, well, you can wait and do them with us if you want. and I read this theory. This is not my theory, but someone said that like Ari Aster kind of tricks you into like joining the cult yourself, because by the end you're kind of like on board with her and you're on board with the
For
cult.
sure.
Right, right.
But like they're full of shit, because it's a really important scene where he's oh, here, take this stuff and you won't feel any pain
Yeah,
at the
and then
end.
Yeah.
And he's
then
screaming.
Yeah,
in
yeah,
pain.
right,
And you're
right.
kind of like, yeah, these guys are full of it and they're murderers, and like she's now joined them and she's like joined their kind of wrathful nature. And yeah, like Buddy is a terrible tourist and he's kind of a lame ass, and Christian he's a mediocre boyfriend, but he's not a terrible person, but yet you're kind of like, yeah, burn. So I just was curious where your sympathies lay at the end of the film, because I wonder, I think there's some truth to that maybe he's kind of like almost indoctrinating the audience into the cult.
I can see that. I mean, when my first viewing, I don't think I was very sympathetic. Like I was a little bit confused about, wow, really? Like he didn't deserve that. Like I kind of felt that way the first time. I think my idea evolved this time around because I saw that was the only way in my view for Danny to transcend and become fully independent.
I'm glad I'm not in a relationship with you, but
yeah, exactly. But I see what you're saying too about because I actually wrote this down for myself that I don't know if I would choose 72, but I don't disagree with the idea of freely giving of your life before you become sick and old and lonely and disconnected.
Yeah.
Like to me, that's almost a mercy. I question whether it's freely given in the film.
Right.
Like that they say, oh, well, but it's a choice and it's beautiful and all the rest of it. I mean, that's a very culty thing to do. Right. And I get that cultishness of it. But yeah, I can see where he's indoctrinating you. I can see where as an audience member, I'm being pulled along and going, well, you have these outsiders who come in. However, the outsiders are recruited by Pele.
They're victims.
They're victims. Yeah, right. They're
the original tapestry, I guess, like he's playing like a pipe or a fiddle, or
like a Pied Piper,
like the Pied Piper, like leading them into the.
Well, and that relates to the original folklore myth of the Harga, right? So, like that town was picked because there's a song about, a poem about the people of Harga. The devil shows up and starts playing a song, and that makes the people dance, and they dance and dance and dance until they die. That's sort of the original setting.
Oh, is that maybe what explains
of Harga? Yeah. So the Midsommar, the maypole is like its own
myth.
sort of like tradition, but yeah, the Harga and the setting and the Swedish sort of folklore history behind that is the devil coming to town and playing until people die.
So what was your take on that then at the end? Did you sympathize more with her and the cult, or were you like thinking that she'd turn to the dark side?
All like Germanic sagas and myths like have to have like a tragic ending. Like there's no such thing as a happy ending in the Germanic or like Norse myths, right? So even the Norse myths themselves, like the end is Ragnarok, right? Everything burns, everybody dies, and so it was satisfying in that way. Like I was really, I would have been, really miffed if they'd, somehow escaped and like
punched someone in a bear suit.
Yeah. So, but yeah, no, it was obviously shocking. It was obviously like pretty cinematically like impressive, but I as a film, I'd agree with you. I don't know if I don't think they deserved it, but it was satisfying as a film ending.
Yeah,
so
cool.
Yeah.
And not to go back to Ready too much, but interesting in that film at the end, like both have these central characters who are ultimately like taken and turned to the dark side, whether it's what's the god's name in Hereditary? Payman, or in this case, like joining the cult. Yeah. I thought that was kind of a cool parallel.
I mean, I guess Aster did a good job for me in convincing me that after the tragedy that she suffered and after having, such a wanker as a boyfriend, Danny feels seen, accepted, loved, embraced. She feels family. Totally. She feels like she's part of, and to me, that's her journey to independence is thinking, whether it's accurate or true. I think she feels like these people understand me, these people accept me, these people love me, these people embrace me, and therefore I'm going to choose this over the life that I've.
Because they give her what she doesn't get from Christian. Totally. And I think the juxtaposition of when she's wailing on the couch and he's like, there,
Yeah.
there.
Yeah.
And then when she's like grieving at the end, when she sees him cheating and they're all like on the floor
Yeah.
with her, like that's like the ultimate form of empathy almost.
Yeah. Was
And-
that is keening? Is that what that's called? Where the women are expressing almost the same level of grief. I think that's what's called.
Oh yeah, they
keening.
do that a lot. In
Yeah,
films,
yeah.
Yeah, yeah. It was kind of a community thing too. Well, and they even have Pele and Danny have that explicit conversation
Mhm.
where he's saying
Yes.
like, "Does Christian feel like home?" And I think maybe that's something that he's pointing out a little bit too, in that as much as we like to vilify, and in many cases should vilify cults, like there's a reason people join cults, or there's a reason people stay in there, and I think there is like an absence of that. I think Danny is like representative of a lot of people who feel sort of like disconnected and maybe alone, and without people around them they can kind of trust or that understand them. So I think in a way, Danny's journey could reflect a lot of people's.
I don't know if we see enough of it in this film, but I think if you look at the history of cults, it's typically the upper leadership that's manipulating the majority of people, but the majority of people do feel community, they do feel family, they do look out for one another. It's a couple of people at the top that are pulling the strings and manipulating that. I don't know, is it Civ? Is that the woman's name?
Yeah.
I remember Ulf is the male sort of elder who greets them, and then is it I think it might be Civ that has the house.
Yeah, I don't know
with
if I'm pronouncing that correctly, but it didn't seem to me that she was that way, although she does certainly manipulate Christian.
Yeah.
Into.
But unlike Wicker Man, you don't have this like strong leader figure like
No,
clearly
no.
directing the cult. Like it does seem more communal.
Mhm,
Yeah.
mhm. Yeah, go ahead. What were you going to say?
Well, yeah, it's just interesting though. But do you think he's taking a bit of a jab at like moral relativism as well? Like, I think in anthropology sometimes the inclination is like, oh well, this is their culture and they do things differently, and we jump off cliffs and we blood eagle people, and they're like,
I love that it was two anthropology students, or was
Yeah.
Pele also an anthropology? But that was it was a little bit on the nose, but it was also so great. Like,
like on the like, I think there's this inclination to respect other cultures and like, no, like that's their thing, that's what they're doing. But really what they're doing is murdering people. So, and again, like I feel like Ari Aster is not on board with cults. Like I think he's taking pretty strong jabs at that culture, even though it seems idyllic on the surface. But
yeah, and even one step beyond that, like both Josh and Christian, both once they realize what's happening, they're not like, oh, this is horrifying, we should get out of here. They're like, oh, this is gonna make me famous, right? Like it's like their reaction to the
and her inclination is actually to leave.
Yes, right. So
yeah, that's really interesting. Because on the one hand, I think, okay, yeah, there's some moral relativism there, but on the other hand, by whose standard are we judging morality?
Yeah,
like if we're looking at it from, is there a morality that's true for everyone?
I'd say burning people alive in a building is like would contradict a universal truth of morality.
Is it universal? I'm not sure it's universal.
Burning people alive?
Yeah. If they're there by choice.
Was Christian there by choice?
He wasn't.
So
but what I'm saying is the cult members were there by choice.
Yeah, that's, I think, the difference between those people seem really excited to be jumping off that cliff. But I think at the end, I think Sam Harris does a really good talk on this called like The Moral Landscape, and he talks about this exact thing, and he's kind of calling bullshit on moral relativism, because he's like, as human beings, we know that like causing things to suffer is bad. Even we can say that's part of our culture, but like throwing battery acid in women's faces because they cheat on their husband is not moral relativism. That is just inhumane. So I think in this case, I think he's playing with that idea though. I think he's playing with that debate. And I think to your point, yeah, like not getting dementia and like having to have someone change your diapers for the rest of your life and jumping off a cliff might be a better way to go, even though from the outsider's perspective, they're really horrified. Mm-hmm. And the cult's like, oh no, it's okay. Like they want to do it. This is good. But then I think it goes down a darker road. And I think by the end, his final comment is like, no, moral relativism is problematic.
I'll jump in on that a little bit.
It's a good debate.
There's a really nice tie in here. And one thing I'll say is I do think that like the world that sort of pagan Scandinavians lived in was a very violent one, was a one that required like propitiation of deities who didn't have your best interest in mind through human sacrifice. So one of the things they're referencing at the end is so Uppsala is sort of religious center, if you will, of Scandinavia in ancient times, kind of pre-Christian contact, and continued to be until Christianization sort of pushed it out and kind of buried it. But there every 9 years, once again, a Danic number.
Yeah.
There's records of a festival that would happen, and they would sacrifice 9 of kind of every living thing they could get their hands on. So like,
So they end when they burn all 9 people in the building. Is that
that's a direct reference to
Yeah.
the kind of the Uppsalan tradition of pagan times to sacrifice 9 humans, 9 goats, 9 cats, 9 dogs, that sort of thing. So like that's just right on the nose. And I think I'd agree with your point about moral relativism, but I do think if you're a person living in a fundamentally pagan society, your moral center is just in such a different place that certain things like even you said, it's like, well, if you're old, then there's justification in maybe like jumping off a cliff. Well, if it's like, well, all of our crops depend on us killing somebody, that's my worldview. It's like that it's easy to justify that when you feel like that's your worldview,
For the
right?
good
So,
of the group.
yeah,
Sorry,
yeah.
I didn't give you a chance to finish if you want to.
No. I mean, I guess sometimes I just struggle sometimes with the idea of, I agree with you that there is, I guess I still have this little inkling, like, is there really universality? Is there really something that all humans should believe? Because I do think it's garnered by time and space and geographic location and all the rest of it. And who are we, whoever the we is, to judge another culture, another time, another place for what they choose to do? Like what makes our viewpoint the universal as opposed to somebody else's?
Yeah. I think that's true to a certain extent, but then if we're talking about, our culture, we like to enslave people and make them do all the work for us.
Yeah.
So like it can cross a tipping point where it doesn't matter. It's not morally justifiable. But
yeah, and I think the end, like you're saying, where Christian's drugged up to the point where he can't move, and basically he's just watching,
Somebody,
watching the world, set on
Literally
fire.
burn. Yeah.
Like that. That might be taking it beyond.
But you
the
are
pale.
kind of rooting for it. That's the thing. Like that's where he works his magic, and I think you do kind of want to sympathize more with her. And you are like, yeah, burn, buddy. Like you're a crappy boyfriend. You should burn alive.
But I would argue too that it's not just about him being a poor boyfriend. It's also about his. I mean, he's shown throughout the film to have a rather loose moral center, right? Like he's lazy in terms of his graduate degree.
Mm-hmm.
He's basically stealing somebody else, Josh's idea, to do this, and then kind of like passes it off as, well, let's just see who does better with it or whatever. So he lacks a moral center as well, and so it's almost, I won't go as far as to say it is, but it's almost just desserts for someone who has no moral center to be somebody else's moral center,
Right,
and
right,
be
yeah.
set on fire. Right?
Not sure I agree, but yeah.
That's why I like horror movies.
Yeah, there you go.
I one thing I'll just bounce off that, like this is such like an interesting conversation, but one thing that I will say is oftentimes depictions cinematically of the Viking sort of past are like very cleaned up and like very sort of Hollywoodized. I think The Northman was like taking a few sort of baby steps in the direction of like the violence and the cruelty of actual pagan times, and it wasn't just Scandinavia. I think the world was a pretty brutal place to live at that point in time too. But I can appreciate that, and it shocks us now, and it should, like you said, like from a moral perspective. But just to realize that, that might be a good segue into talking about the ritualistic deaths. Do you want to talk about ritualistic deaths in the
Sure.
in the film? Yeah. So there's a bunch of ritualistic deaths, which are some of which are historically connected, some of which are kind of like in culture, but are maybe not quite so historical. So the first one we got to talk about, obviously, is the Adashtupa, which is when the 2 elders go to the top of the mountain and throw themselves off. And so I had to do a little bit of looking on this one because I'm familiar with Adashtupa. I know what it is, but it started to make me question, like, is this an actual historical thing? And so I guess the earliest reference is in a Swedish saga that was revived kind of in the 1600s, and it's in reference to a family. It's almost like a comedic scene where this family is so cheap they don't want to host guests, so they decide to throw themselves off a cliff instead of like spending their own money to
I
like
can relate to
be
that.
generous. So yeah. So
thinking
it's kind of
about
funny,
you.
but for whatever reason, it sort of caught in the popular imagination. A bunch of the sort of the cliffs where
Like
like
some of a big back deck, so
yeah,
I can
it's that
throw
big.
myself off.
That makes
Exactly.
sense now. You
Yeah.
kind of
Yeah.
got the villain's lair thing going, right? So, but I guess the name Adestupa ended up popping up a bunch kind of in the 1600s as people name places. I think it was kind of in the cultural milieu. So whether that actually happened or not is up for debate. But it definitely makes for great TV. And yeah, I know they
And
reference
what about
that.
the burning of the bear? Is there any connection there, do you think? Or?
Yeah, so the saga reference that comes to mind for me is there's a saga which is like the saga sort of run the gamut from like almost historical to like extremely like 100% Marvel comic myth type thing. And so there's a saga called the saga of Arrowad, who's this guy who's got a bunch of things happen to him, but essentially he has this like lifespan that spans 300 or 400 years, and he has this magical arrow that when he shoots it, it goes back into his quiver. So like honestly, like we're talking like Marvel level sort of like
Nice.
superhero powers. But at one point in time, he does go to the land of the giants, and the giants keep attacking their camp, and so he fights a bear and he cleans out the guts of the inside, and he jumps inside the bear and he fires his arrow from inside the bear out the bear's mouth, and he lights a fire in the bear's head, so the bear's eyes are flaming. And so when the giants show up, they see this bear with flaming eyes that's shooting like arrows at them, and they decide to run away.
I'd run.
And they leave his companions alone. So that's the only nod I could find of that. The only other connection I might mention is that Norse warriors. You might have heard of berserkers before, and so berserkers is old. It literally translates to bear shirts. Yeah, so like Burr is like bear, and then Sark is like shirt. So berserker is like a bear shirt. And the idea is that they would often probably wear animal skins. That was probably historical, but the idea more is that they would like embody the spirit of the animal.
That makes sense.
And so this is the same with wolf skins. So Hednar is another term that is sort of tossed around by a lot of sort of Norse groups or people who are interested in sort of Vikings, and was used at the time. That's like wolf skins. And so the same sort of idea. So this idea of like becoming an animal or becoming a beast by putting on the skin is definitely like a Scandinavian thing. And the burning of the bear specifically, I don't know if I can say that that's
I think the burning of the
thing.
bear maybe is the. I think he was supposed to symbolize like because he was a bad person,
The
or
monstrosity
like,
of
like purging the society of negative aspects.
Yeah, that, I mean,
or
I
blessing the
don't know
community.
anything about Norse mythology or whatever, but if you look at sort of global, fire is often a purge,
right?
So
purging, yeah.
that makes sense.
And the blood eagle you referenced too,
yeah. So
where the guy in the it's the boyfriend, right? The British boyfriend.
The British boyfriend is hanging
And they
in
find
the
him in
tree.
the bar.
I wonder, but he's flayed.
Yeah.
But Josh immediately is like, "Oh, it's a blood eagle." So what is?
Yeah, so there's this particularly gruesome method of execution that's mentioned in a few sagas, and so there are a few characters who purportedly were killed this way. But the idea was you would sort of like strap them to the rock, like face down, and then with an axe you'd separate all their rib bones from their spine, and then you would like yank their ribs open so that when they breathed, there'd be nothing holding their lungs in their back, and their lungs would like pop out of their back like wings and sort of like inflate and deflate as they breathed. And so the idea being that if you could undergo this and die without sort of like moaning or groaning or screaming, you would be carried to Valhalla. But if you made any sound, then you'd be sort of And it was often like politically motivated to make a spectacle in a scene. So for example, if you've watched the history series Vikings, which has some historical elements, they dramatize a lot of things. The main character in the first season, Ragnar, and his son Ivar the Boneless, who shows up in later seasons, who was an actual historical figure, purportedly kills King Aela of Northumbria using the blood eagle. So this was like wasn't like a common thing, if it was a thing at all, but it was obviously very dramatic, made a big impression. It was fairly
Do you like that, or is it pretentious?
Well, the fact that it had him all like stringed up, like super nice and stuff like that, and I like he was still breathing, so I think like the idea was that he was still alive, but
He deserved it.
It was a little bit. That was another one of those things where I was kind of like, it seemed like a little bit of a throwaway, sort of like, oh yeah, another reference to I read a Wikipedia article or something. It wasn't like, it didn't seem super deeply historically connected, but there's saga references to that.
I had one big dislike though. I was very distracted how Christian looked like this hybrid between Seth Rogen and Chris Pratt.
Yeah.
The whole movie, I'm like, I feel like it's Chris Pratt or Seth Rogen, and it bugs me that it's not those actors. Did you find that at all?
No.
Okay.
We both immediately like, that guy is like Chris Pratt, like the yeah.
Christian.
knockoff.
Anyways.
Chris Pratt. Two other ones I'll mention real quick. So Drowning in the Swamp,
Right.
particularly in Denmark, that was purportedly like chieftains who felt like they got too old or couldn't like defend their title would sometimes choose to just walk into the swamp with a stone or with their weapon and then drown themselves basically in the swamp, because there was a lot of swamps in Denmark. It's more common there, but it's really important for archaeology because the swamps preserve the bodies almost perfectly, and most of the historical knowledge that we have about sort of what they wore, even down to the details of like the types of tattoos that they had, and tattoos were very common back then, were from these bog bodies. There are a lot of bodies of young people between the age of 12 and 18, and so there may have been some sort of punitive, criminal proceeding that involved sort of drowning them in the swamp, but it may also have like a ritualistic aspect to it.
That scene was not in the original Midsommar, though. I
just
think
gonna-
that is exclusive to the
I was going to
director's
ask
cut.
you, because that's the
Okay.
scene where I'm like, I don't remember this scene. And so there's like maybe half of the 11 minutes, I think.
Right.
Yeah, I think the rest was just extended dialogue, or
Yeah.
like some of the rituals and stuff were a bit elongated.
Yeah.
But that was the only scene that I
That was the only
specifically
one
thought
I
was
didn't
new.
recognize.
Yeah. A gripe that I have about, and there's a lot of death in this movie, but the gripe that I have is they're throwing around Adinic symbols everywhere, and the one thing they don't do is they don't hang anybody. And like hanging is the traditional like method of sacrificing somebody to Odin. He obviously, like we talked about with the runes, he hangs himself like as a sacrifice to himself to learn the runes. So I was a little bit disappointed with that. That was one. If they had a hanging scene, I would have been like, oh, okay, all the Odinic references make sense. Here it is. But it does, yeah. So I was a bit disappointed about that.
Did you have other dislikes? Because you would reference the
The length of the storytelling or his storytelling is more my gripe than anything else, because he's so good visually. But I was gonna, never mind. I had something to say, but it's not related, and it was going to be lame, so I just won't say it.
I'm so intrigued now, but I guess we'll never know.
Right? We'll never know.
I'm going to have to put an explicit thing, because we've said a couple things anyway, but it was about, is the Odin hanging, is that the origin of auto asphyxiation? But yeah, there you go.
That bit. There you go.
Could be, right? Speaking visually, other than the obvious, which is that he's trying to portray an altered state of being, I questioned his choices around like the swirling thing, with the hand clap, and the like weird mushroom trippy thing. Like I don't know. I found that was kind of gimmicky. It was like, is that really necessary? Like, okay, you said you're taking mushrooms. Do we really need to see the world going all like fuzzy?
Yeah.
I don't know. That's a minor gripe, but it was just like, I kind of wondered if it just didn't seem like that was necessary to me.
Yeah, that's fair. I think you made that comment too, didn't you?
Yeah,
You thought the psychedelic stuff was a bit much.
In the first scene, when they arrive at Harga, or they're about to get there, and she sees the grass growing through her feet and stuff, like it felt appropriate there, but like I just found it distracting later on, and it's like I'm trying to look, and there's a scene where she's sitting at the table as the May Queen, and the flowers are like all going wild, and
like
it just distracted me.
almost.
I think it would have been more impactful if I could just like focus in on, because her face is like, it's just so intense, and she's realizing what's happening. And
is that a reminder though of her mental state? Like, you might forget, like, oh yeah, she drank this cup like half an hour ago in the film, but like maybe that it's informing her decision making. So like when she's like, yeah, burn my boyfriend Christian, but the background, and like maybe that shows that like, is she making these decisions rationally, or is she making these decisions because she's on mushrooms? I wonder if maybe it's trying to get you to relate to her state of mind, or part of this, like if they're trying to indoctrinate the audience into the cult as well, that for the audience, for them to maybe get into that. I don't know. I wonder if it does have an effect. It didn't bother me, but you notice it. It's not subtle necessarily.
Yeah, I mean, the one place that I thought it was appropriate is actually the cliff scene, the aftermath and her reaction, because it focuses your attention on her reaction. Like everything else kind of goes blurry behind her. Like even more so, it's not just a depth of field thing for the camera work. It's like, no, it's really blurry, and it forces you to look at her face. Yeah. In that case, I thought it was appropriate, and I thought, okay, that's doing what I want to do, which is focus on her reaction. But there were other times when it was like, nah, I don't know. I didn't find it was a useful technique for me.
Yeah, that's fair. Fair critique.
Part of it was like the rest of the cinematography was so clean and was just like so beautiful. It seemed a little tacky. Yeah. Anyways,
cool. Well, I think that's all the specific things that I wanted to discuss. Was there anything else? Was there anything you didn't like about the film otherwise, or you really liked?
I enjoyed the film. Like as a film, I really enjoyed it. Like the character arc, I enjoyed that as well. I definitely. appreciated like there was a lot of references to the different, lots of different, the runes and some of the Scandinavian culture and the dress and things like that. And the scenery is obviously beautiful. If I was to pick it apart from like a folklore mythology perspective, I'd have a few gripes, but as a film, it's a great film.
Cool. Actually, so when he says this is The Wizard of Oz for perverts, that did kind of make me want to go back and look at it more through a lens of Wizard of Oz. So her name's Danny, which is maybe sort of similar to Dorothy.
Right.
And then there's the three guys. I was thinking like the Fool, the Mark guy, is he like the Scarecrow?
Right.
And then I was thinking like Christian, like kind of lacks courage because he didn't stand up for her.
Right.
Like, are they each one of the people? Do you see any other, like they go off to Oz, which is like this new land, and like they come to the cult, which is kind of, I don't know, like it's interesting. When I first saw it, other than that one reference to the Scarecrow in the apartment,
Yeah.
it doesn't necessarily scream Wizard of Oz to me, but I was trying to go back and puzzle out, are there more
That's an
references to Wizard of Oz?
That's an interesting exercise to go back and interpret it that way. Like I didn't hear him actually say that. Like the two quotes I had from him was that it was a surrealistic breakup story and it was an adult fairy tale, but I didn't hear the Wizard of Oz thing. Because I mean, I can see it. I mean, you're pulling back the curtain.
Also, Wizard of Oz starts in black and white, and the beginning of this film is very black and dark, like Hereditary. And then it transitions. Then you have this like transition to light, and that's kind of when Wizard of Oz becomes color. Like, I wonder if that's another connection.
Yeah, interesting. Yeah. Who's the monkeys?
The cult members.
Cult members. I can say from like experience in publishing too, I know like comp titles are really an important thing, right? So it's like this versus this, and so part of that too may have also just been his sort of like pitch to people to watch the movie, right? Because you say Wizard of Oz, like you immediately have like hundreds of thousands of people are like, well, I like Wizard of Oz, right? And it's like, and then you add the tagline, and it's like, yeah, you're going to capture a certain audience there, right?
Yeah.
So
I was going to bring my kids to this because they like Wizard of Oz.
Yeah, right. Oh, we should have listened to the end. Yeah.
To kind of put like maybe a bow on it, like because we have sort of mentioned offhand themes. Like I think Aster, certainly coming from Hereditary, there are themes in this one of grief, family, ethics to some, which I think shows up in Hereditary as well. Is there anything else that you think he's thematically building his body of work on? And maybe you can not speak to Beau is Afraid specifically, but knowing that you've seen it, are you seeing that play through into his future, like into his current work?
Yeah, I feel like Beau is Afraid has a lot more connection to Hereditary than this one.
Interesting. Okay.
I thought it was interesting that he was moving through these seasons in this film, and it almost felt like Hereditary was kind of like winter, and then this one's kind of like summer. So I thought maybe Beau is Afraid would maybe be fall. I wasn't sure if he was going for a seasonal thing. Yeah, for sure. Like family, I think like her journey. But yeah, I feel like Beau is Afraid and Hereditary are very similar thematically, and this one stands out as a little bit different, but there's definitely some connective tissue, I think, still with Hereditary.
Yeah.
But that's why I think his films are super interesting, because there's a lot going on thematically. It's kind of fun to try and figure it out.
For sure.
And I think it's interesting that he kind of spoils the whole movie for you if you're paying. Like that, you were talking about that opening.
Yeah. But
the whole movie's kind of there, but you don't know.
You don't know.
And also the thing about how they get people to fall in love, like they pan across and they show like her cutting the pubic hair and the menstrual blood. And then I love the scene where they're all sitting and all their drinks are yellow, and then Christian's drink is just a little bit orange.
Just enough that it's like obvious to the viewer. Yeah.
All those little Easter egg things he throws in, they're so clever. And I don't think I picked up on that the first time, but you can watch these movies like 5, 6, 7 times and find new things.
Well, even the dinner scene or the feast scene before he goes in to copulate with the young woman, he's the only one that's not wearing white.
Right. Yeah. He stands out in a lot of the scenes. It's like a different color, right?
He stands out with that blue shirt or whatever he's wearing. And it was so obvious to me this time. I think the first time you're watching it, you're looking for plot. You're trying to figure out what's going on. And then this time, or the second time or third or fourth or whatever, you get to focus in on like, oh, look what he's doing visually. Like this time for sure. Like I say, the drone shots really popped out for me. There were certain visual techniques that he was using. And I do think that's the beauty. We talked about this with Jen and Hereditary, was the idea that you go back and you start to see, okay, that's what he's doing there. That's what he's doing there. And I think that's the cool thing about, like, I think
it's more rich than pretentious in my response to Stuckman.
Yeah.
Oh, sorry.
No, I was just going to say, I don't recall word for word what he said. Just, I know that there was disappointment in his and my apologies because I know you're listening to this, Chris.
I'm sure.
My apologies, because I'm paraphrasing, but there was definitely disappointment in his view of this one versus Hereditary, and I didn't pull that out of a hat. He used the word pretentious for this, so.
I was just saying, like, you could watch this entire movie and ignore all the characters and the dialogue and just try to look for things in the background, like all the paintings in the apartments and all the murals, and then in the building where they're staying, there's all this iconography on the walls and all the pictures. Actually, related to that, are they full of it? Are they lying when they're saying that we do this thing every 90 years? Because I was thinking, is that his way to trick these anthropology students into wanting to come?
Well, that's because you mentioned every 9 years
Was the
cycle.
Edenic ritual, yeah.
That might make more, because they say 90 years though, right?
They do. That they said 90. That's what I got.
But then
too.
in the barn, or where they're staying, they have the pictures of the May Queens in photographs.
Yeah.
Well, the camera hasn't been around that long. If you were truly doing this every 90 years, you wouldn't have all these photographs.
But I got the May Queen thing is every year.
Well, that's every year.
It might have been the full festival, I think, maybe.
Okay, so what was the thing that's every 90 years?
Well, I thought it was that cliff thing that was every 90
But isn't
years.
that every time someone turns 72?
That'd have to be every 18 years, right? Or every time.
No, it's anytime anyone in the colony turns age 72, then they have to jump off the cliff. I think it just happened to be that year 2 people were turning 72.
I think maybe the thing that happened every 90 years was like the sacrifice in the barn. That was maybe that was the 90-year thing, like the human sacrifice with the you might guess. But I'll say too, for anything I said in terms of like the mythology, the history, I don't think he was trying to make a historical film. I don't think he was trying to make a a mythologically accurate film. I think what he was trying to make was a visually stunning, beautiful film that you could watch again and again with like different layers, and I think he succeeded in that. So
awesome.
Yeah.
Well, maybe we could wrap it there. So I think we all recommend Midsommar.
Yes, absolutely.
But we like Hereditary a little bit better, and you haven't seen Hereditary.
I haven't seen Hereditary, so
yeah. Before we go, I just want to plug a few things for Josh here.
Oh, thanks.
Yeah, so clearly if you listen to him at all during the podcast, you know he knows a lot about mythology, Norse mythology. So he's written 2 books and produced a game. Do you want to...
Shall I hold those up?
Yeah, sure. Do you want to speak to these quickly?
Yeah, 100%. So I've got a troll hunting fantasy inspired by the Norse myths. Book 1 and 2 are out, The Gatewatch and The Everspring. It's about a troll hunter named Torrin Tentries in a fantasy world. If you like The Hobbit and have read it way too many times and need something fresh, this might be something for you.
I'll put links to these where you can buy these on Amazon in the description.
Fantastic. And this is All Thingy, One Will Rise. The expansion's coming out here soon as well, but this is a board game for 4 players set in Viking Age Iceland, where you take on the role of a chieftain and you vie for influence. So not a super intense game in terms of setup or rules. You can get it on the table. You can start playing in a few minutes. And
can you burn people?
You can. Optional rules.
Okay.
That's the next expansion.
That's the next expansion. That's right. The Midsommar expansion.
But I own it. It's very fun. It's a great game. Any other things you want to plug? Any other more Norse things you're doing?
Just that the 3rd book in the trilogy is coming out hopefully this fall.
Nice.
So keep an eye out for that.
Sweet. Where can they find you on socials if they want to follow you?
I'm most active probably on Twitter, Josh M. Gillingham. But
Are you reconsidering that?
Twitter's an interesting place to be.
Exactly.
Never not an interesting place to be. But probably safest place is my website. So joshuagillingham.ca.
There you go.
Awesome.
Yeah, fantastic.
Well, thanks so much for coming on the show.
Yeah, thank you so much. That was very informative.
Thanks for having me.
Appreciate that.
It's a pleasure.
And we don't know what movie we're doing next episode.
What the next one is, yeah.
But tune in
2
weeks from now and you'll find out.
Yeah.
So thanks for listening, and we'll see you in the aisles.